It says this thing out on here is live. So at least we got that going for it.
Hey, we got other
There we
people
are.
too.
So let's build an audience for a little bit
Yeah, awesome.
while I try to get this stuff worked out here where I can record everything. So start that recording. Oh, that can stop. Let me stop that a minute. Delete that out of there. Oh, I don't need to do that. That'll work. Yeah. That recording. And let me go over here real quick and go here. And I think we are good to go.
Awesome. What time is it? 7:59. We're almost like on time.
Look at that. And I was like really in trouble like about 15 minutes ago.
Dude, I am impressed. I am very impressed.
Well, there's another live feed that was supposed to happen out there, and I don't know what I did to it, and hopefully it's gone. But if it's not, oh well.
Oh well. Oh well. So, do we want to sit back for a little bit and build a little bit more of an audience before we get going, or do we want to jump into this?
Let's give it a couple more minutes. I want to find out what's going on with clicking. In my
All right, I'll be right back.
Yeah, go ahead, man. Hey, there we go. I got it turned off. I record in GarageBand, Red, and it's got a beats per minute thing on there, and it was beating, and I was picking up all of it on my recording software. So,
oh, gotcha, like a metronome.
Yeah, very much, and it was beating a little fast, actually. Beats per minute pretty high, but.
So the Steelers Pats game is going on right now, and so Cyborg at least won't be joining us until that's over. But I assume he's rooting for the Steelers.
I would guess.
I would hope so.
Yeah. So when we get ready to start the recording, Pat, do you want to?
I'll do the intro. Absolutely.
The intro.
Yeah, man. I got this. Is this episode 41?
This is episode 41.
Sweet.
So give me just a minute while I get everything taken care of. Just about there. Delete that. There.
We're very, very unprofessional here, Red. I'm sorry for that.
It's no big deal. You're acting like I know what I'm doing.
Well,
I could only guess you probably know more of what you're doing since you're, at least has an NASA shirt on.
You're right.
Don't ask me to set up a hangout. I have no idea.
Neither do we.
Uh-oh.
Cool.
My YouTube feed's buffering.
So
weird.
Fred said that the feed stopped, but of course he lives,
Yeah, he lives like
in the swamp.
Yeah.
So I don't think he really gets internet out there.
So let's just see. Everyone, let's see. Yeah, mine's buffering. I don't know why, but I can at least everybody's chatting and it seems to be working all right. So
okay.
Yeah. We've been having a little trouble with our internet here, so I don't know what's going on.
Okay. Well,
right,
it is.
Let's go ahead and we got 10 watching, so
Yeah, that's Oh, there's Ryan. Hey, so whenever you're ready, dude, hit the record button and let me know when to go.
Yep, let's do it in 5. And go.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 41 of the Flight Test Community Cast. Today, our guest is Red Jenson. He is the chief. Let me see if I get this right, Red. SUAS Type 1 and 2 chief pilot for the NASA Armstrong Flight Research Facility.
Yeah, you got it. Nice job.
Dude, I nailed it. All right. So today we're going to be talking with a guy who he might know a thing or two about RC airplanes because he gets paid by NASA to fly them.
Maybe just a little.
Just a little bit. Red, I am really, really excited to talk to you. Like I have been giddy for the last couple of weeks since you agreed to come on. I'm not kidding.
I know worries. Believe it or not, I'm just like you guys. I'm a huge airplane nut, so this is totally cool with me.
So you're saying you're just a couple of you're an idiot as well. You shouldn't be down on yourself, Red.
No, I'm right there. I'm right there with you. I do lots of dumb stuff too. It's all kinds of fun.
Cool.
Well, that's the funnest part about it, isn't it? Just being an idiot and doing crazy stuff.
Yeah. Do whatever's fun.
Yeah. So, I read about some of the work that you're doing before I even was aware of you and what you did. My introduction, or when I first came across what you do, is when I was reading about the Prandtl wing and the whole concept of the proverse yaw and all of that. And I would like to get into that while we're doing it. So here's kind of like what I'd like to talk to you about, or we'd like to talk to you about tonight. Well, I'll say what I'd like to talk to you about because Mike and I have not really discussed anything. I want to talk to you about your background. Who are you? How did you get started in RC? How did you land this job at NASA, and what are some of the projects you've worked on and are working on currently? That's my main focus of this discussion tonight. Just to kind of give you a heads up.
Yeah, we can do all that.
Cool. So where did you start with flying model aircraft?
Well, that's a great question. By far, my largest influence was my father. He was a model airplane guy and a full-scale pilot. And my earliest memories are in the garage with him building RC airplanes. RC airplanes in the 50s. And I was born in the early 70s. And I think my earliest memory is probably about 3 or 4 years old at the park with my parents flying a kite. So I grew up around it. It was never really a choice for me. I just sort of always knew that the airplane thing was in my blood, and that's what I really wanted to do. So while other kids were maybe out doing stuff they shouldn't have been doing, or even just out playing with their friends, I was usually in the garage building airplanes with my dad.
Awesome.
So that's really where it all started. And I've been flying RC. Gosh, I was just thinking about this earlier today because I was sure the question was going to come up, but it's been 40 years now since I have soloed an RC airplane. So,
wow.
I'm 46. So if you do the math, I sold when I was 6 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay.
It was a plane for the old timers out there. It was a plane called a Mini Mambo, and the radio system was a Heath kit that actually my mother had built. She was an electronics tech for Hewlett Packard.
Oh,
so
wow.
She was the only one in the family that could solder at that time. So she built it for us, and it worked.
Wow.
So it's bred a lifelong passion of all things aerospace, and ultimately I have RC to thank for where I am today and what I do for a living. So it's been a great career and more than a hobby for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Now You correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not really sure on this, but like poking around on the internet, you have a couple of RC airplane designs to your credit, do you not?
I do. That's one thing that I discovered early on is I love to scratch build and I love to design. So I've dabbled in it. I've never really taken it incredibly seriously, but I've been fortunate enough to sell a couple designs and kit a few and do things like that. So probably the most recent one, or at least the largest visibly commercial success, would be the EF1 racer called Invictus, which was ARFed by Hobby King.
Oh wow!
Yeah, electric Formula One is a racing class. I've always been attracted to racing airplanes.
Which one was that?
Invictus.
Okay.
So it's I believe it's discontinued now. They sold them for, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years, something like that. Did a couple production runs, and they've moved on since then.
Okay. Awesome.
But I've also kitted a bunch on my own. I have a laser cutter, and very early on, I was kitting a few airplanes, and I would have other folks cut my kits for me, and then I decided that I really needed a laser cutter myself to do prototype work and things like that. And then that sort of turned into some small production runs, and every now and again I'll be inspired and design something and kit a few of them. Most recently it's been a few little micro gliders, 30-inch wingspan, balsa wood, sort of rehashes of some old classics like the Wanderer and the Windfree and a few others that haven't seen the light of day yet.
That's fantastic. That now you're talking my language. I love anything old, balsa, and sailplane.
well, for me, that particular sidetrack or rabbit hole, whatever you want to call it, that I went down with those was for sure reliving some of my youth. I spent a lot of time flying gliders when I was a kid, and I just sort of wanted to recapture some of that and put my own kind of modern twist on it with micro gear and things like that. So it's been great. I loved it.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
That's really cool, man. Do you have a favorite airplane?
RC? Well, that's a tough one. I wouldn't say I have one favorite. I guess if I had to pick maybe a genre or a type, I'm really attracted to high performance stuff. And high performance can mean anything within its own sort of realm, but for sure, pylon racing aircraft and sailplanes. However, that being said, I consider something like Prandtl, which we're going to talk about later, to be high performance. Right? It's not necessarily fast, but it's high performance in its own special way. So I tend to like to push
in terms of efficiency.
Yeah, aerodynamic performance.
Yeah.
So I sort of like to push the boundaries there, and just do whatever strikes my fancy.
Cool.
So awesome.
Yeah. So hang on, let me get back on the Google Hangouts because I'm looking at the YouTube thing right now, and it's your mouth is moving, but you're not saying anything, so it's throwing me off. The delay.
Can you do something about the fat cameras on me too? That makes me look like I weigh 400 pounds.
Yeah, dude, if you figure that out, let me know, okay? And I'd like to drop a couple years of age. I'm 47 myself, so I'm right there with you, bro.
Cool.
Yeah. So, do you do anything full scale? Do you have a pilot's license? Do you fly? Do you have an interest? Or
I do. I'm a pilot. I am currently designing and building my own Formula One racer right now to compete at Reno.
Oh my gosh! Are you kidding me?
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. That's for real.
Wow.
Oh man.
So can you give us any details on this? Can you talk about it at all, or are you trying to keep it all under wraps right now?
It's on the down low. I haven't really released any drawings or any concepts or anything like that. But I will tell you that there's a lot of model airplane technique and construction in it. It's all hollow molded. It's all done in a traditional sort of model airplane style, however, obviously stressed appropriately for the full scale environment. But one of the techniques that I'm using is a way to keep it light and strong, developed definitely in the model airplane world. A lot of the airplanes that I've seen are overbuilt. While they're completely adequate strength-wise, they're probably a little bit heavy. So I'm really trying to target the 500-pound minimum for the aircraft, I feel to be competitive, you've got to be right on the minimum. So I'm doing everything that I can to build as lightly as possible. And that includes, some pretty expensive materials. And it also means I've broken a few parts trying to figure out where the strength limits are. So, a couple years down the road, maybe you'll see it flying, maybe it'll be a failure. I don't know, but at least I'm going to try.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That is really awesome.
That's one of my dreams, is to design, build, and fly my own airplane someday.
It's funny. It's not, if you're a model airplane guy, you've already done it. You just haven't made it big enough where you can get in yet. All the same physics apply, and you've probably got more on the ball than the average home builder who's never done any RC. You understand the flight mechanics and how the controls work and the basic forces of flight and all that kind of stuff. So I finally realized that this was doable. For me, I always thought it was out of reach because I didn't have the structural engineering background. I wasn't worried about the aerodynamics. I wasn't worried about the design per se. I was always worried about the thing being strong enough so that, number one, I didn't die. Once I realized that there's a method to test and to design to, then it all really becomes totally doable. So I'm super excited about it, and that's really kind of curtailed a lot of my RC activity.
Oh, I can imagine. Yes. So we had a guy on as a guest not too long ago who basically the same kind of story, except he was just trying to build an ultralight from basic materials from Lowe's. Peter Schriepel. I don't know if you are aware of him at all.
I followed his video series. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So yeah. So he flew it, and
yeah, awesome.
It is. It's a pretty little biplane, and it's funny that in this day and age, as far as aviation has come, it's almost to the point where nobody has the confidence to do what people would have done back in early aviation. Just build it, have the confidence to get in it and fly it. And I guess there's a pro and a con to that. The pro to that is we don't have a lot of people being killed in airplanes these days, and that's a good thing. The con to that is that it seems like it prevents people from, like, there are plenty of people out there who are capable of doing something like that, and capable of being innovative, and capable of designing a low cost, decently performing airplane.
Yep.
So I don't know. Like I said, that's my dream, my ultimate dream. One day is to do that. I don't know if I'll ever do it because I have a hard time focusing on anything for any length of time.
Well, the only thing I can say is just go ahead and give it a try. I thought much the same way. I have airplane ADD, right? I can work on 9 different things, not finish any of them, and be completely satisfied because I'm.
Right. I look around me and that's all I see.
That's absolutely, Patrick.
So the one thing that I told myself is if I started this full scale plan that I needed to dedicate my time to it 100%, which is not true. I can't do that. I've still build RC planes and do other things too. But I have found that the motivation is there because this is so different that I have been able to devote large chunks of time to it. And it has sort of satiated the appetite a little bit for the RC stuff. So I greatly reduced my RC fleet, even though my son would laugh because he counted 39 airplanes the other night when we were out in the garage. But to me, that's kits and things that haven't been built plus flying stuff. So to me, that's I have no airplanes. But to normal people, that's maybe a little obsessive. But I'm all electric at this point, just because they're quick and easy, and again, I don't have to concentrate on the other stuff. I sold my gas stuff, I sold my turbines, and that was really to just get rid of the distractions so that I could focus on a full scale airplane because it really means that I have to get it right. Not only am I building my own airplane, but I'm also designing it, and I'm also doing all the structure. So if I screw that up, I could be dead, and even worse,
that's your butt on the line, right?
Yeah, and even worse, I could hurt somebody else, which is the last thing I want to do. So it demands a lot of concentration, and I have lots of help. Fortunately, I work with some pretty smart people, so
Yeah.
when I feel like I'm outside of bounds on any little thing, I've got lots of people I can ask, particularly with regard to structure and a little bit of aero help too. But got to try it, right?
Nice.
Well,
Very
and
nice. Yeah.
as well to be able to do that and have the help there. I mean, living in Kansas City, you know, I could never do anything like that because, you know, I don't think there's that many smart people here.
Well, the thing is, you know, just like we're doing now, the internet is a fantastic place to read and learn. I'm a voracious reader. I credit all of my, I don't know if I want to call it skill or know-how, or probably just what I've learned has been through reading, be it various forums or you know, books or whatever. That's how I sort of pick up my knowledge. And you know, I'm a voracious reader. I read all the time, and it's been a fantastic way to get educated.
Awesome.
Sure. Well, I've got a couple of questions for you, especially in your work at NASA. You know, when you're doing all this, I'm going to say RC stuff because really that's what it is. Do you guys use hobby grade equipment, or is it specialty equipment that you guys have put together yourself?
All of the above. So with the stuff at work, it's really kind of left up to me to figure out how we want to implement things. But typically, we use off-the-shelf servos, off-the-shelf linkages. You know, same batteries. We build our own extensions and wiring harnesses and things like that. But for the vast majority of the airplane part, not the research part, but the command and control stuff like that, it's off-the-shelf RC stuff. Now there are autopilots on board. There are various other payloads and instruments and things like that that all have to play nicely, but they are by and large just big model airplanes.
Yeah. So I'm probably talking more about transmitters, receivers, things of that nature. Is it mostly?
I use a JR12X and mostly JR8711 servos. So yeah, it's all hobby grade stuff.
Oh, awesome.
Good hobby grade stuff.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah.
hobby grade stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta. Yeah, you tend to gravitate towards the stuff that is higher end, and it's not because higher torque, for instance, or we're brand snobs or anything like that. But when you're doing research flying, it's all about, one, making sure it works so you get the data. So you buy quality stuff because quality stuff tends to not fail. There's an airworthiness aspect to it. So some of these aircraft are several hundred pounds, and you can't have an out of control airplane due to you know, an inexpensive servo or a cheap receiver or something like that. So you tend to use tried and true stuff and stick with it. Plus, you know, it makes spares easier. If everything's the same, then, you know, you just grab in the box and replace that servo or whatever.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are some of the projects that you've worked on? What are some of the aircraft that you've flown or helped develop?
So, or just over the years.
Well, whatever. Yeah. Let's go.
How much time do you have?
Anything you want to throw out there.
Well, so I'm relatively new at NASA. I've only been there about 5 years. A little bit of history, though. Let's see. I'll have to think about the years, but I don't remember exactly. But I owned a hobby shop for quite a while.
Oh.
And a friend of mine who was a fairly well-known sailplane designer was working for a company called Arcturus Marine. And Arcturus is a navigation star. It's the third brightest in the constellation. I can't remember exactly what. But anyway, it was a marine company, and he was fairly well versed in composites. So he was building composite stabilization fins for the world's luxury yacht market. So they have essentially these big underwater wings, and they go on the bottom of these big, giant, expensive boats, and they move just like a wing or an aileron would to stabilize these while they're underway. So he developed that. It turned out to be a great product line for this particular company, and it sort of they developed it figured out the science to design and implement these things and build them. And then he was bored after that. So it got to be a production environment where he could turn it over to somebody else, and they just did production. He convinced the owner of the company that UAVs were the next up and coming thing. And since he was quite experienced building sailplanes, he convinced him to let them design a UAV and try to market it. So the owner sort of invested some money. And the first project they did was just a simple set of wings for an existing airplane for the Navy, actually for the Navy Research Labs, NRL. And, did I lose you guys?
Nope, you're still
good. Okay. And anyway, so long story short, that turned into a whole product line. And I was working at the hobby shop at the time. Mark knew that I was a fairly competent pilot, and Mark was the designer, by the way. And he asked me if I was interested in doing some flight testing for them. So I agreed, and that was just like a weekend thing. You know, they would get an airplane ready, and we would go out and test it. And I did that for a few years, 2 or 3 years, and sort of figured out that I kind of liked what they were doing. It was a lot of fun. The pay wasn't bad. And at the same time, I was completely burnt out on retail. I just had enough. You know, every night, every weekend, it killed my flying hobby.
Yeah.
It just wasn't any fun. So sold the store. Actually, I didn't sell the store. I sold all my inventory, closed the store, kept the name because I had a couple of RC kits that I was making under that name, and went to work for Arcturus full time. Long story short, I worked with them for about 10 years. And during that time, we would come down to NASA at Edwards Air Force Base and rent airspace from them to do test flying.
No kidding.
So yeah, so that's how that introduction started. And you know, being the airplane geek that I am, I was always asking a million questions and wanted to go look in the hangars and show me what you got and tell me about this and let me look at that. And it all culminated in them offering me a job. They had a model lab, or have had a model lab, since the 1950s. It was started by a guy named Dale Reed, who was an RC modeler, had one of the very first RC sets here in the Antelope Valley. And he's the guy that developed the lifting body. So
yep.
You know, the $6 Million Man thing, all that was all him doing it for fun on the side. And he happened to have some 8mm movies that his wife had shot, and he was showing them around the office. Hey, look what I did on the weekend, type of thing. And it caught the attention of the center director at the time, Paul Bickle. And he agreed to fund this thing, this research for this lifting body. So they agreed to work on it, you know, lunchtime, after hours, weekends, that sort of thing. And, you know, if you know anything about the lifting body series, you know it was fairly successful. A research program that eventually gave us the space shuttle.
Yep.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I'm the latest guy to carry on that tradition with the model lab and doing research stuff for NASA.
That's
so anyway,
special all into itself.
Yeah, that
cool
is very
stuff.
special.
So they offered me the job, and I told them no, wasn't interested. So I was living in Northern California at the time, and you know, I have a family, and they're all in school, things like that. So it would have involved a 500-mile move, uproot my whole family, that sort of thing. And I liked what I was doing. I loved working at Arcturus. I honestly thought I would retire from there. And over time, it took about 1.5 years before I finally decided that it would be something I'd like to do. And I had visited them. I saw what they did. And of course, I was very much attracted to the job, but the fact of moving and all that just didn't appeal to me. So I kept telling them no. So after about 1 year of this, I mentioned it to my wife. I hadn't told her prior to this that, hey, you know, NASA offered me a job. And she says, oh, really? That's cool. Where's it at? And I said, oh, it's down at Edwards. And I said, well, we'd have to move. And she says, okay. Said, what do you mean, okay? She says, okay, let's do it. Let's move. So all told, it took about 1.5 years to convince me to pull up my roots and go. And I'm glad I did. I don't regret it at all. It's been fantastic, and I'm sure this is the job I'll retire from.
So where do you live now? The reason I'm asking is, do you live anywhere near Mojave?
Yeah, I'm about 40 miles from Mojave.
Okay. I was at the Mojave Airport in 1986 when Rutan was building the Voyager, and went in. I was in high school at that time. I took a tour of the place, saw the thing being built, and that was the coolest airport I have ever been at in my life. I don't know if it's still as cool as it was back then.
It's got a really cool vibe. Yeah.
It was an amazing place. Oh my gosh. Like, I remember an F-86 taxiing by. Like, it was done up kind of like a drone. It had the orange on the tail and on the wings, and there was an F-105 tucked away in the corner over there, and various states of disrepair. And it was just the coolest place ever. And then Scale Composites had their thing going on. I don't know. To me, that whole area is like definitely a mecca of aviation, and
for sure,
someplace I'd love to get back to someday.
It still is. Of course, all the the Spaceship Company and Virgin Galactic and all that, they're out there along with Scaled, along with the National Test Pilot School, and there's a really big contingent of the home builder, do it yourself. A lot like the flight test community for full scale type stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it still is just as cool as it was. There's a few more regulations and restrictions and things like that, but yeah, it's still the same cool little desert airport out in the middle of nowhere where some really cool stuff is happening.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, though, I live in Palmdale. Mojave is directly north of here on Highway 14, and yeah, it's, I don't know, maybe 30-minute drive or so, 40-minute drive, something like that.
Okay.
That would be fantastic. Go out there and hang out for a while.
It is. They do. I'm friends with a few of the Scaled engineers. They do pylon racing every other Friday, and I've only made one so far. It just happens to be, there's always something going on where I can't get away. But a lot of good guys out there. If you're familiar with an airplane called an IFO, which is one of the first sort of nearly indestructible indoor airplanes. That's designed by a guy named Dan Craig. He's a Scaled engineer, a good friend of mine, and they do some really neat stuff out there.
Wow.
Yeah, that is cool. Just the coolest stuff ever. Really.
Yeah, I'm trying to look through some of these. A guy named Delta Dart on here is asking what's typically added in terms of basic instrumentation packages on the models.
Oh, sure. So it depends on what we're doing. We have some purely RC airplanes that we use. For instance, we've got a Carbon Z Cub, and we use it for a mothership. Right? It's a drop ship for some of our smaller Prandtl flying wings, all the way up to things that are fully autonomous. So our basic autopilot is a Piccolo made by a company called CloudCap Technology, and it's kind of an all-in-one unit. It's got a full IMU package in it. Full aerodata package, which is pedostatic system, and then integrated GPS and integrated command and control links. So that's the bare minimum usually for our autonomous stuff, and then it depends on what we're doing from there. We'll have several instruments. Can be visual instruments, cameras, things like that. It can be atmospheric instruments. It can be radars. ADS-B is a big thing right now. We're doing a lot of work with integrating unmanned aircraft into the national airspace with full-scale aircraft. Can be enhanced data collection systems. So it really just depends on the project. But we basically start with a Piccolo autopilot system and then integrate from there.
That's awesome.
Speaking of ADS-B and the integration aspect of things, typically, well, by and large, the hobby community is very against the registration requirement that has now been, I guess,
reinstated. Yeah,
reinstated.
Yeah, reinstated. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so it's funny. I walk the line, right? I'm an avid RC guy, and I also do it for a living. I'm with most of the community. I think it's overreaching and unnecessary. I think there is some level of regulation is required, particularly with the proliferation of quadcopter type aircraft where they take very little skill to go fly, and without that skill sometimes comes a little bit of a lack of judgment too. So right. I'm all for having them flying, but don't be doing stuff stupid with them, right? You're getting in the way of the firefighters, you're flying over people, doing that kind of thing. That's what I have a problem with. So I don't know what the right answer is. The wrong answer, though, is punishing everybody for the acts of few, but in absence of a better idea, I'm not sure what the right way to go is.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing, is that it is a very small minority. to be on the non-cynical side, it's a very small minority of people that are bringing things down on the rest of us. To be on the cynical side, it's another money making scheme by the government, you know, and a way of controlling whatever.
Well, I've been a long proponent of the AMA. I know some people like them, some people don't like them, but I feel if you belong to a CBO, a community-based organization of some sort, and they have an established safety track record, an established set of guidelines, that if you follow that, then you ought to be good to go. It's worked for decades, and now it doesn't. I would venture to say, though, there's a lot of folks that have A, never heard of the AMA, or B, don't want to join because they have something that they can fly out of a schoolyard or field or something like that in the non-traditional sort of model airplane field club type sense. And that's probably where the sort of consternation comes from. I get that.
Yeah. If it were simple, which it's not, the division in my mind should be, do you make money with this? If this is your business, then we need a different set of regulations. If this is what you do for fun, then join the AMA or fly within a certain set of reasonable boundaries.
Right, and that's what we had for a while with Part 107 and the registration requirement going away, and unfortunately they felt like that's necessary to bring back. So
well, and the problem is people weren't being reasonable. I mean, there are too many people, like you said, that are able to fly irresponsibly, easily, without knowledge of what they're doing.
Well, and still yet, I mean, kind of like what Fred's saying here on the chat. You know, the FAA is selling it as a safety system, and just because I register don't mean I'm going to be safe necessarily.
That's right.
And to do that to me is a little silly. You know, I think anywhere that you can buy something that's very easy to fly, you should, you know, they should give you like a quick set of rules. I don't know. I mean, there should be something that they give you with that thing. And
well, I think there's definitely a part lacking with the education. It could be something as simple as a YouTube video, like, hey, do this, don't do that, don't be a jackass. Yep. And that's definitely, you know, lacking. The one thing I will say, you know, I see a comment here in the chat about if you don't have a giant balsa plane, the AMA fields, they run you off. I think that's a common cop-out, and I think that's what a lot of people say, unfortunately, without really experiencing that. In my opinion, or at least in my experience, it's been exactly the opposite. Clubs are shrinking. We have less and less young people coming into the community. So I know at my club and the clubs I've been part of that, you know, we welcome people with open arms. I can't tell you how many times I put somebody on a buddy box that just happened to show up with their kid and, you know, get them to try it out. So, you know, I don't know what to say. I know there's that connotation out there, but that certainly hasn't been my experience.
Well, I can tell you my own experience here in Kansas City. I live within 10 minutes of an AMA club, and I went over there 3 or 4 different times trying to talk to those guys. And of course, they were much older. I mean, much older than myself, and they wouldn't even talk to me. And
they can be cliquey. That's for sure. That's true with any group. You know, if you're a new guy showing up, and sometimes they don't take kindly to that.
Yeah, well, I didn't even bring any airplanes with me. I wanted to try to find out a little about the club, let them know, hey, I'm interested, blah blah blah, and they would not talk to me. And then I actually drove from where I live now. It's almost an hour to another club in a town I used to live in, and I rode up on a motorcycle with my wife, and they grabbed me, you know, brought me up to the flight line. You have any airplanes? What do you fly? I mean, they were what I think you experience, where I've experienced both ends of that spectrum. And I'll be honest with you, the club that I'm in now is, I probably will never leave it unless I move completely out of the area. But the club that's 10 minutes from me, I won't even drive by there now, because I mean, those guys are so unwelcoming. And
yeah, I guess it's hit or miss. You know, yeah, there's clicks in everything you do, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And for me, whenever I saw that, and I won't pretend that it never happened in our club, because I witnessed it a few times, but I also went out of my way to let those people know, not only the club members that were acting like that, but also the other folks. I'm like, hey, this isn't, this is not normal, and this is supposed to be a fun thing. And for me, it's RC has, it's absolutely fun. I love the aero, I love the building, I love the flying, I love all that stuff. But when it comes down to it, it's really the people. I've met some of the best people I've ever known, and some of my best friends are folks that I've met through aero modeling. So when I see that sort of that elitist attitude, which I see it a little bit in the higher end parts. I fly turbines and did some pattern and things like that, and they sort of tend to get a bad rap, but there absolutely is some of that out there, and it's unfortunate. So you just got to do your best to overcome it and spread the good word.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess the thing to do is do like you did, Mike. Go find another place that is welcoming, because they are out there. I mean, my club, I'm currently not a member. I'm financially, I was not able to this year. Finally, I am again. But a wonderful group of people, totally all about bringing people in, teaching people to fly RC, teaching people to build RC. But there are those out there that aren't. So if you find one that's not welcoming, go find one that is. I guess is the thing.
That's exactly what I'll tell anybody. But it's definitely find one, because those people that want you to be in the hobby, want to grow the hobby, and want to make it better, and want to do it right and safer and all those things, for the most part.
Yeah. And also it's important to get with a club that wants to have a little fun too. That's important. So we've mentioned the Prandtl wing a couple of times. I'm a huge flying wing fan. I love them. I've built a few from scratch. Some performed better than others. I built a couple that have been freaking outstanding, and I'm very proud of that. And I built a couple that have been just awful. So for people that might be listening that have never heard the term Prandtl wing before, can you explain what that is all about and why it is a really cool concept?
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's first of all, it's not a particular wing or even a design of a wing. It is a theory and how we redistribute the lift, and this can work on any flying wing, or any actual wing for that matter, including propellers and wind turbines, and any lifting surface can benefit from this technology. And what it is, there was a German mathematician and fluid dynamicist named Ludwig Prandtl. And in 1920, he wrote a paper describing what he called lifting line theory, which is basically the first mechanism, the first tool, the first mathematical equation that you could use to predict the performance of a wing. And it turns out he was right. And it's been taught in every college level text since then, since his 1920 paper was published. He was the first to describe tip vortices. He called them vortex ribbons. And basically what it says is that if you spread the load out over a wing, it should be shaped so the wing is loaded in the shape of a quarter of an ellipse. That's called an elliptical lift distribution. That's what we've known since day one, that's the most efficient way for that wing to carry lift. In 1933, Prandtl wrote another paper, and in that it's a non-elliptical or bell-shaped lift distribution that he's proposing. It was a relatively short paper. I think it's only 4 pages and about 6 equations or something like that, not too much. It was never translated into English until recently, and it was published in a soaring magazine. And in it, he said, lifting line theory and elliptical lift distribution is awesome, but it's wrong. You have to integrate the weight of the aircraft, the structure that it takes to lift that same amount of weight needs to be incorporated in it. So if you keep the same root bending moment, the same, strain on the center of the wing, is there a way to arrange that structure that results in a lower induced drag? And the answer is yes, and it's a non-elliptical lift distribution, or a bell-shaped lift distribution. And so that's sort of as far as he took it. There were other folks that sort of experimented with it along the way. I think last time we counted, there's about 7 individual designs that have flown successfully, both RC and in the full-scale world, that demonstrate this trait of pro versus yaw, which is incidentally a byproduct. It's not the reason that you do this in the first place. It just happens to work out that way. The first were the Horton brothers, and they're probably the most well-known of the flying wing experimenters. There are pictures of Reimar and Ludwig Prandtl together in the same photograph, and the contention all along was that they knew each other and that they were corroborating on this thing. Nothing could be further from the truth. There's not 1 ounce of evidence that they ever shared any data or anything like that. So the assumption up until now has been that they were contemporaries, which they were, but they absolutely were not working on the same problem. The Horton brothers did it a little bit differently to achieve this Bell span load than what Prandtl proposed. And it's really, there have been a few people throughout history that have sort of gotten pieces of it and sort of continued on with the work. But really the culmination is with Al Bowers, who's chief scientist at NASA Armstrong. This is really his project. He's the brains behind it. He's the one that figured out how to do this lift distribution and turn into a formula where you could basically design any wing around it or with it. And I'm just the guy that figured out the structure and built the airplane and fly it. So, and it all really started out about Al as a flying wing aficionado, but he's really trying to figure out why birds don't have vertical tails. You know, why is it that these models of flight that we've been staring at for thousands of years, none of them have vertical tails, but every one of our airplanes, for the most part, do have vertical tails. And it turns out it's because they're not using an elliptical lift distribution. So that's it in a nutshell. I could probably talk for an hour about this, and I'll certainly go into as deep as you like. But
as far as I'm concerned, you could keep talking. I'm loving it.
All right. Well, first of all, anybody that's interested in it should go and download the NASA technical report. That's got all the math in it. It's got all the technical equations. There is also a link on the AMA webpage that's got the solid model, I believe, and all the calculations. So you could build a Prandtl 12.5-foot span, and I can dig up that link here in a couple minutes and put it in chat, awesome, or something like that. But do that, and that's really where you probably start. Most people will probably find the report dense and maybe not get it, and it took me honestly a year of working with this thing before I really understood kind of all the details about how it works. So I would urge you to ask questions. You can reach out to me. You can publish my email if you like, my personal email, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm also fairly active on RC groups, and there's a Prandtl thread there if you want to ask questions in there. But so back to the bird thing. Some birds use their tail for stability and control. They all use them for stability to some degree, but some of the terrestrial land soaring birds have a big broad tail, like falcons, eagles, things like that, and they do use them to maneuver. But the model for efficiency is actually the great wandering albatross. These animals dynamic soar,
right,
and they can travel, you know, around the world in a season and come back to the area where they were nested from. And they have what they call a vestigial tail. It's not really a feathered flying surface. It's more of a, we joke, it's a fairing for the landing gear. It's kind of a meaty appendage that kind of looks like a tail, but it's really not there for stability and control. So how are these birds able to maneuver so expertly that they can dynamic soar on the swells in the ocean? But they also, if you just Google the wandering albatross and look at some of the photos of it, we ran across one, well, several actually, where they're dragging their wingtip in the water.
Yeah. So,
you know, they can control their flight path so effortlessly and with precision that, you know, has so far eluded us. Flying wings up till this point are known to have several traits. The CG range is incredibly narrow. When they do stall, they do one of two things. They either tumble, your CG is too far aft, or they bob, where the nose will bob up and down. And typically they'll bob because you have to err on the side of being nose heavy in order for it to be stable. Edwards Air Force Base, where I work, is named after Captain Glenn Edwards, who was killed in the YB-49 when it tumbled out of control.
Yeah.
So historically, flying wings on the surface are so beautiful. They're elegant. They're very bird-like. They're pretty, and they look so simple. Yet to get great performance out of them, it's a pretty tough challenge. So you know, this Prandtl technology is a complete departure from the normal traditional way of designing a wing. A few of the characteristics are proverse yaw, which we talked about earlier, and I can explain how that happens relatively simply.
Well, I think where a lot of people are familiar with the term adverse yaw. So, and they think of it this way. Okay, so you have a wing, you go to make a turn, one aileron is going to drop, one's going to raise, one is going to cause drag. So it doesn't, you got to add rudder to make a coordinated turn. It's basically, I guess, because of the drag on one side of the wing.
Yeah, so if you think about how an airplane creates lift, right? There's a low pressure on top and a relatively high pressure on the bottom. And when you roll an airplane, you deflect the ailerons, your downward side aileron, let's say you're making a left turn or a left roll, your right side aileron goes down into the higher pressure zone. So as you deflect that aileron, the plane rolls left, but the right wing is being drugged back. So you roll one way and it yaws the opposite way.
Right.
And that's called adverse yaw.
And is that because, okay, so when you drop the aileron, you're inducing it's greater camber.
Yes.
So are
Greater
you
lift.
inducing more, like, what is that? Parasitic drag, or what is that?
Well, your hand says vortice.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So when you deflect that aileron, since the wing is creating lift, right? You have the higher pressure underneath and the lower pressure on top. So as the aileron deflects downward into that higher pressure zone, it gets drug aft.
Okay. So it's simply a putting the barn door out in the slipstream kind of
air
thing.
brake.
Yeah. So if your
that.
other side aileron, right, your left side aileron is up, that's in the relative lower pressure zone. So the downside aileron has more drag than your upside aileron does. That's why aileron differential exists, right? You're familiar with differential, where you have more up travel than you have down travel. It's precisely to counteract adverse yaw.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, the vertical tail was invented by the Wright brothers. Their early
Happy
designs,
Wright Brothers Day.
Yeah. Their their early gliders were no vertical surface on them whatsoever, and they figured out that they called it well digging or well drilling, where they would roll one direction and the aircraft would slide off sideways, hit the ground, and break up, and they'd have to repair it. They also invented the yaw string, by the way, too. So some of the very early photographs, you can see a yaw string on the aircraft. So the vertical tail,
which is a really simple turn and bank indicator in a sense, right?
Yes, it's strictly a yaw indicator. So when you're a pilot and you're looking out
it's the ball
front of the aircraft, it's the string. You want to keep that string right in line. Yeah, the ball is a coordination indicator too, which is basically the same thing. So they invented the vertical tail, and it sort of stuck. It's a very effective way to control yaw and add stability as a result of that elliptical lift distribution and this adverse yaw problem that's prevalent on 99.9% of the aircraft on the planet. So along comes Prandtl, and he postulates this theory, but he never builds an airplane, and he really kind of drops it completely. He never really did anything with it. And so a few guys dabbled with it, and to my knowledge, nobody ever built an aircraft demonstrating Prandtl's theory until we came along. And actually, Al had an intern prior to me who built a Klingberg wing, which is a 2-meter wooden flying slope wing. And he redesigned it to use this lift distribution. And that, as far as I know, is the first aircraft to ever demonstrate Prandtl's theory and proverse yaw because of Prandtl's theory. There have been other aircraft that have demonstrated proverse yaw, but not coupled with Prandtl's theory. So I have, I don't know if you can see it, but I have a little Prandtl wing right here. This is one of the very early concepts that we had for a Mars airplane. We're working on a Prandtl M right now, which is the Mars project. And this is a 24-inch span airplane. The idea is currently to still package this in such a way that you can fit it inside of a cube satellite enclosure, specifically a 3U, which is 3 CubeSats stacked together. And it can ride as nose ballast on the next Mars mission. And this will get ejected in the upper atmosphere and glide down to a certain landing point and map the proposed human landing site and do some atmospheric research as well. But this is basically the Prandtl wing that you've probably seen, but scaled down to 24 inches. We've since gone away from this because you can see that it's a tiny little thing and you can't carry much payload here. But the interesting thing about this is when I designed it, I had in mind a way to package the airplane. So how do you get a 24-inch span thing inside of a 4-inch cube? And the idea was you could take this thing and it's a single surface, 1 layer of carbon fiber and some fiberglass, stiff enough to carry flight loads, but not stiff enough that you can't take it. Let me see if I can get it on camera here, and you can roll it up.
Oh my gosh!
Oh wow!
So you do this, right? And now you can fit this inside of a little tube or whatever. And
okay. For those of you listening on and not watching, he just took a 24-inch. Red just took a 24-inch flying wing, rolled it up, let it go, and it went right back like those silly little bracelets you used to slap on your wrist.
Funny idea. That's where I came.
Awesome.
That was my inspiration. That and a tape measure. They both do the exact same thing. So
dude,
you're using the
hero. That is awesome.
Yeah, it's just, you mess around with stuff long enough, you figure some things out. So you use the camber of the airfoil to actually become the structure of the wing. And luckily it's stiff enough. So it just happens to work out. So we've gone away from this, though, for reasons I can talk about later. But, it's a great idea, but it just didn't work. So it's fine for little stuff.
That is just unbelievable.
So this is just a free flight, a little Chucky type glider.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to I realized I didn't explain how and why the Pro versus yaw works. So when you're designing an airplane and you're using the elliptical lift distribution, one of the goals is even downwash behind the wing. You want an even amount of downward deflected air after the wing. And that's where you get your minimum induced drag from. With a bell-shaped lift distribution, you actually get downwash towards the center of the wing in here, and then it crosses over into upwash at about 70% of half of the wingspan. I don't know if I can get back here far enough where you can see what I'm doing with my fingers. So traditional elliptical, you want even downwash all behind the wing. And with the bell-shaped, it's downwash and it transitions to upwash. So the whole wing still makes a lift, but your upwash becomes, or your downwash becomes upwash, and that has to do with the way that the air is approaching the wing. When it approaches a wing, it actually turns upward slightly out near the wingtip. So if I can, and the way we achieve this lift distribution, by the way, is with twist. You can also do it with planform. So you can shape the wing to sort of resemble this planform. Most famously, the Spitfire is an elliptical planform, and that's a way to get an elliptical lift distribution purely through shape. You can blend airfoils, you can twist. So this is a lot like, I don't know if you can see right down the tip here. This is a lot like extreme washout.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. This is twisted about 12 degrees.
Yeah, I can see the twist in it.
And it's also non-linear, which means it's not a completely straight progression from root to tip. If you were to visualize the tip or the center is slightly positive, slightly negative, it goes a little bit positive here and then twists all the way back to negative at the tip. So now when you have this plane that's flying through the air with the upwash out at the wingtip and the downwash in the center, when you deflect the aileron that same direction, you're now deflecting it. Your downside aileron is now into the upwash. Into the downwash, which is less drag. So when you deflect, you increase the lift, but you reduce drag. So when you roll left, you also now yaw the same direction, left. And so that's where the proverse yaw is generated. It's not from, I've seen some comments online, it's not from the control surface per se, but the control surface is outside this crossover point. Incidentally, in a normal wing, you get, and I'm explaining this poorly, I'm all over the map here, but in a normal wing, you get a wingtip vortice. And that's why you see the winglets on airliners.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the high pressure air underneath, the low pressure on top, span-wise flow takes it along the span. It hits the tip and it starts to mix. So the high pressure pushes up and starts to roll, and you get the wingtip vortice. The winglet is there to take advantage of that. The air rolls up, hits the vertical part of the winglet, and gives a slight little push, almost like a sail on a sailboat in some ways. You get a little bit of forward push, and that's really a reduction in drag. And that's why you see a lot of high-performance sailplanes that are span limited, airliners that are span limited. They have to fit it within gates at the airport. They use these winglets. Otherwise, you would just increase the span. Well, this really works like a flat winglet. So at the point where the downwash becomes upwash, that's where your vortice forms. So your vortice actually forms here and not at the tip. So your control surface is placed outside of the vortice, and that's what generates the proverse yaw.
So there is very little mixing of high pressure to low pressure at the wingtip, or none at all.
As far as we can tell, there is none at all. Well, very little. There might be some leftover effects from the vortice itself. One of the neat things about this airplane is that on a typical airplane that's highly loaded or elliptically loaded, you'll see a very tight, very highly constrained, high energy vortex. That's why if anybody's a full scale pilot, they talk about wake turbulence, things like that. Taking off behind a heavy aircraft can be problematic because they generate these vortexes that are a huge amount of energy. Well, with this lift distribution, the vortex is bigger and more loosely constrained. So you get less energy lost to the air. So that vortex is all lost energy, right? So that's where part of the efficiency comes from as well. So with this, and again, if you download the paper and if you go to the AMA site, you can see some tests we did where we basically, it's kind of like tufting the airplane, but we put VCR ribbon tape behind the trailing edge of the wing and flew the airplane, and you can see exactly where the vortex is forming and where it quits out at the very tip. So your tip losses on a traditional wing are something you really have to account for. They're much less critical on elliptically loaded, a non-elliptically loaded wing. So your vortex is looser, less energy, so it's not nearly as critical.
And okay, so structurally, how does this drive the structural design of a wing? What I'm thinking is your heavy stuff is inboard, and then as you get outboard, it kind of mimics that same distribution where you have some very wispy things on outboard of the wings.
Well,
in terms of weight and structure.
Yeah, it could be. If you really wanted to optimize the structure, you would do that. And a big clue to that is if you look at birds. If you look at an X-ray of a bird's wings or look at a bird's skeleton, the outer 20 or 30% of their wing are fingers, essentially, right? They're these very light, wispy feathers. And if a feather, you could take it and they bend very easily. Well, that would be, in the elliptical world, that would be equivalent to carrying 10 or 20% of your body weight on your fingertips, right? I can't do that. I don't know any human that can do that. Right. So, that was a big clue for us right there, that there's not much load out at the wingtips. So if you wanted to design the wing purely from a structural standpoint to mimic the load, then yes, you would have more structure shifted inboard because your load center shifts inboard more towards the root. Same root bending moment, but your load is further inboard, right, and less outboard to basically zero. So with an elliptical lift distribution, as your loading comes down very abruptly at the tip. That's where the end of the ellipse is, right? It's almost vertical right at the wingtip. Whereas with a non-elliptical load, it's very gentle and that is fact upwash out there, not downwash.
That is That's very cool. So there are plans out there or something somebody could download to actually build one of these or whatever.
Yeah, if you want to give me a couple seconds, I can Google around here and find it.
Yeah. Actually, I gotta make a run upstairs. I'll be back in just a sec.
All right.
Mike, you're in charge, buddy.
Oh, you gonna let the crazy one in the asylum, are you? Yeah, we've got a couple people asking about where they can get that, and I'm gonna have to. I'll have to post it on our Facebook page because for whatever reason YouTube won't let you copy links out there. So if you would, Red, when you get that, just post it into the chat in the Hangout, and then I will take it out to for everybody listening. I'll take it out to the Facebook link to this live.
Sure, it's out there. I just popped it in. And Bobby's comment about the twisted tip of the wing is creating the cone shape of its vortice. And they're creating the vortice so they can control it. Sort of. We're not creating the vortice. We are moving the shed point of the vortice from the wingtip inboard. There's always going to be a vortice. We're just moving where it's at. And
you're moving where it's at and then trying to take advantage of what's there, right?
And you're taking advantage of it by placing the control surface outboard of it. The other thing to note is that there's not just twisted the tip, that the entire wing is twisted. And again, it's a non-linear twist, so it's not just a straight progression from the root to the tip.
Right.
So I just typed the name of the program. It's called Prandtl. It's Ludwig Prandtl. I can also look up the technical report and link that to. It's called on the minimum induced drag of birds or something. I can't remember. I should know. I'm an author on it. There we go. I think I found it. Give me a second here.
Okay. Yeah, sorry guys, there's a little bit of dead air, but you know, when you're trying to copy stuff,
yeah, here we go. I found it, so let me link it.
That'll be fantastic. I'll put it out there on our Facebook page where people can.
There you go. There's the technical report. So between those two links, that'll give you pretty much everything you need. I would expect someone will want to answer or ask questions. Maybe I should just go ahead and put my email in there. Is that cool?
As long as YouTube will let you do it. I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes YouTube's weird about links and such.
Yeah, I see it grayed out the AMA link, but the technical paper link is there.
Cool.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, there's your email.
Brad the Alien, I like it.
My little side business is alien technologies. So.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just the whole idea of when I heard the term Prandtl, it was really interesting because it took me back to one of my favorite classes in college, which was heat transfer. That is the only other. That's the only time I've heard of Prandtl.
Yeah.
The Prandtl number, the Newslet number, and all that good stuff. Anyway, oh God, I love that class. Heat transfer, fluid dynamics, thermo, good stuff.
So fluid dynamics is, that's aero, right? Aero is a fluid.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's just a different characterization of that. Prandtl's well known in the aero world. I mean, he's pretty much the guy, right? But yeah, interesting stuff.
Yep. So what are some of the other projects you've worked on or are working on, if you can talk about those?
Oh yeah, I can talk about all of it. Everything we do is for the public. We do the research, usually write a paper of some sort, and then publish the data for the public to see. Mm-hmm. And nobody's asked in the chat here, but I've run across the comments before. Well, why does NASA patent their stuff? And that's a really easy question to answer, in that we patent it so somebody else can't patent it. And we put it out there in the public domain so that everybody can use it. So unlike some unnamed manufacturers of full-scale aircraft, when they make an innovation, they'll patent it so that they don't have any competition. we patent it so that everybody can use it. So that's that in a nutshell. Let's see, we're working on an air launch to orbit concept where you take a rocket and it has some sort of a payload on it, and you've got to get it into, right now we're just looking at low Earth orbit, but communication satellite, something like that needs to get into orbit. Right now it costs about $100,000 a pound to put something into orbit.
Wow.
And that's very expensive. And that number is not a hardware number. That's not what the rocket costs. And what it is the amount of manpower that it takes to launch a rocket from a terrestrial-based launch complex. Vandenberg here in California, Cape Canaveral in Florida. You've got to have sterile airspace. You've got to have sterile sea range where there's no boats. You have to have people to patrol it. You've got to have all these other folks on staff to monitor the meteorological conditions. You've heard them talk about weather windows, right, where you have a certain amount of time to launch. You also have to wait sometimes for the Earth to be in the right position to launch a rocket. So all of these constraints add up to making space launches very, very expensive. It turns out that if you can air launch a rocket, from 30 or 40,000 feet, that you save a tremendous amount of money, not only in range safety costs, but you can also go where the weather isn't, or you can go to a more favorable launch location for your orbit inclination. Mm-hmm. For instance, the closer you get to the equator, the more of a head start you can get, up to 5,000 miles an hour. So it really opens up doors to be able to launch from the air.
Is that simply because of the diameter and the rotation of the Earth?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Spinning faster when you go off the planet?
That's right. That's exactly right. So, out at the equator, you're spinning the fastest relative to your orbit. And that's all free velocity.
Unless you're a flat earther.
Yeah. Don't get me started on that. Those imbeciles drive me nuts.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Anyway, so air launching is not a new thing. It's been done before. There's a company called Orbital Sciences, I think is their name. They have a Lockheed L-1011, which is a full-scale airliner. Yep. And they can put a rocket underneath the wing, and they do air launch. Virgin Galactic and the spaceship company, they air launched their Spaceship 1, Spaceship 2, right? So that's not a new concept. What we've done, however, is taking a look at optimizing that. How do you air launch to get a little bit more efficiency? Well, it turns out that direct carry, where you're an airplane carrying a rocket, is not the most efficient way to go. If you think about a pickup truck and you've got your 20-foot or 22-foot family boat, right? There's a reason it's on a trailer and not in the bed of the pickup truck. You can tow a trailer much more efficiently than you can directly carry that boat in the bed of your pickup truck. So our idea is to take a very high lift to drag ratio vehicle, essentially a glider, and put a rocket underneath that and then tow that whole package up with some other airplane. So, they have, Scaled has a White Knight, right? And there's exactly one of those in the world. It's a pretty specialized piece of hardware, and they're building the new one, the big giant one, Stratolaunch, right, which should fly anytime, I understand.
Is that at Mojave?
It is, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And is it really huge. The largest hangar door in the world?
I believe it is. It is the largest airplane in the world. I've been fortunate enough to see it, and it is absolutely massive. So if you take a high lift to drag ratio type vehicle and you hang a rocket underneath it, then you can tow it with some other aircraft. Civilian aero towing has been around since the 50s or maybe before, certainly before that, and World War II and things like that. But Piper Cub will easily tow a glider that's much, much larger than it, and it can do that happily because the glider is so much more efficient than the tow plane. Well, now if you take that same glider and you take the pilot out of it, make it unmanned, you again get a further reduction in cost. Some of them are obvious and some of them aren't so obvious. Some of the obvious ones are you don't need a propulsion system. So that means you don't need to carry fuel. If there's no pilot in it, the cockpit doesn't have to be heated or cooled. There's no ejection seat. There is no cockpit for that matter. You can have an electric airplane, which means not electric propulsion, but electric flight controls. Now you don't have to have hydraulics. You don't have to have all the associated actuators. So your whole your whole airplane, your launch vehicle or your tow vehicle, sorry, not your tow vehicle, but your carry vehicle becomes much, much more expensive. I'm sorry, inexpensive.
Inexpensive.
And lighter.
Yeah, and lighter. Now, some of the costs that people don't think about are that traditionally with a terrestrial-based launch complex, your rocket, especially if it's air-launched, has to be man-rated. That means that there's some level of certainty that it's not going to blow up and take the flight crew with it, right? Even if you're launching an unmanned satellite, your airplane that's carrying it, or even the launch pad for that matter, needs to be protected in the case of a failure. Well, with an unmanned aircraft, that's not such a high risk. So now your rocket, your launch vehicle doesn't need to be man-rated. So again, there's a cost savings there. And we haven't even gotten to the part where you save 30% or so roughly of your fuel because you're air launching in the first place. So you couple all those things together and we think we can put something into orbit for about $10,000 a pound.
Wow.
So that's a long story. You asked what I was working on. We have a roughly 1/3 scale model concept of it's a 27-foot wingspan glider. And it's a twin fuselage design, so something like straddle launch. It has kind of an inverted V in the center wing, and you'd hang the rocket underneath that. You tow the whole affair up to some altitude. You cut the glider loose. The glider drops the rocket goes off into space, and the glider comes home. So totally reusable launch vehicles. Your tow plane can be any number of different things, and all that coupled together works to reduce the launch costs.
That's
and your
cool.
tow vehicle's far enough, or your tow vehicle's far enough away from everything that if something was to fail, you have a much better chance of not having any issues.
That's right, and then the actual launch is decoupled anyway, so the glider's in free flight when it makes its launch. And so, in the full-scale world, we're envisioning something like a C-17 or a pair of C-17s. You could put the payload, the rocket, into one C-17. You could put the glider in another C-17. You could be anywhere in the world you wanted in a day or two to get a favorable launch inclination and the right weather window. And again, just makes the whole thing portable, reusable, and less cost.
That's amazing.
Very cool.
So Delta Dart's talking about the F-106 and C-141 project.
Yeah.
That's called Project Eclipse. And I have a very good friend of mine at work was an engineer on that project, and he's got some fantastic stories. They also called it Dope on a Rope. So that was there's papers out there on that too if you were interested in reading it. But the project is called Eclipse if you want to research that a little bit more. So that program is called TGALS, Towed Glider Air Launch System. And in the world of horrible acronyms, that's one of them. I suggest you do not Google that without some sort of safe search on. It's so look for Towed Glider Air Launch. That's much better. But TGALS, it's bad. And
Do not type in T-Gals. You might get something with a surprise.
yeah, it's definitely a surprise. So
Packing a little bit extra there, are you?
yeah. So there was that. I was actually hired in the very beginning. That was the project I was specifically hired for. That project had languished for some time. They actually never had a flyable prototype. And since then, we've built a couple different airplanes. And last I heard, there may be a company that's ready to start building a full-scale flight demonstrator. So,
cool.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff.
So is the glider just a conventional glider with the rocket strapped underneath, or
sort of? It's two fuselages with typical stock outer wing panels, and then the center wing is an inverted V that's custom. And in the center of that V, there is a custom-built fuselage that carries the rocket. So there might even be a picture online here.
Yeah, I saw it on. Actually, saw the video of you guys towing it on the Facebook.
Yeah,
the Air Force or the. I can't remember where I saw it at now.
Yeah, here's some. I'm going to just link a Google search I did. There's some artist concepts in there, but on the second line, or even the first line, there's some photos of the actual vehicle there. Let's see here. I graded out. Yeah, it's not going to let me post it.
Yeah, most of those links won't work in YouTube chat. You can put it over in the Hangouts chat where I put the YouTube originally. Yeah. And then what
There
I'll
you go.
do is I'll copy that and put that in the.
Oh yeah. Okay. Cool.
I'll put that in the Facebook comments as well.
Yeah, there you go. So let's see.
That is slick.
Yeah, it's different for sure.
So right now I'm looking at a picture. What I'm looking at looks like a picture of two full-scale gliders married together.
That's the idea.
With
yeah.
that. Okay.
Again, so you can use off-the-shelf components with a minimum of custom-built stuff and keep the cost down.
Nice. And what size rocket are you guys looking at with that?
We're not looking at any particular size. We're basically trying to develop the technology and the concept to let other folks, do with it. Our goal is private industry, to be able to take this and run with it.
So somebody like SpaceX or something like that.
Yeah, whoever, everybody needs cheap access to space. It's the way of the future, and we're trying to do our part to make that possible.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
So obviously NASA doesn't feel like the private sector is a competitor then.
No, I don't think so. Not at all.
Okay.
I think there's still some stigma that the private sector maybe is not up to the challenge of all of the oversight and all that sort of stuff for space flight. And I think there's some, lots to learn there. There are people that would argue that space flight is hard. Well, there's nothing to argue there. It is absolutely hard. But, people like NASA are really the right people to do that. And that, unfortunately, some of the accidents we've seen are a result of a little less stringent oversight. NASA gets a lot of crap about how much things cost and how much oversight there is, and that, which I get, but it's also the reason why we tend to kill less people. We take that very seriously.
Yeah, gotcha.
All right, let's see. What else do I have? I know I got some other stuff on here. So for just general public, what's probably the most recognizable thing you worked on?
Boy, that's hard to say. In the RC world, I guess the largest commercial success I would say is the Hobby King thing, the Invictus EF1. I also did, I don't know if you guys have been around long enough, but maybe 10 years ago or 12 years ago, there was the whole flying boat craze where there were hydroplanes that actually flew. They looked like an unlimited hydroplane that you'd race on the water, and then they would take off and fly around.
Stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah. My design was called Miss Hanger 1, and I sold, 5,000 or 6,000 of those things. That was fairly...
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it absolutely burned me out. I did it all myself in my garage. My wife helped me, and my kids helped me. And but man, that was a lot of work. That's a great way to ruin your hobby. And then as far as NASA goes, I would say that TGALS, or TOAD, I like to call it TOAD, Orbital Asset Delivery, instead of some other funky name, and Prandtl are probably the most highly visible things that I have done.
Yeah.
Although there have been a ton of other smaller projects that probably don't get the same amount of recognition that are equally important. Some really neat stuff. Things like AutoGCAS, which is autonomous ground collision avoidance software. So that's a system that takes control of the airplane when it's in imminent danger of impacting terrain. Now, right now, you can get an app for that, right? You can go to the Google Store or the iTunes and download a collision avoidance app right now. The difference is we developed software and an algorithm that will actually take control of the airplane in the event the pilot doesn't. So for instance, in the military, there's a certain thing called G-lock, which is G-induced loss of consciousness, where you pull so many G's that you pass out. And it kills pilots around the world every year. Perfectly good pilot, perfectly good airplane, it hits the ground for no good reason. So what we did at work is the engineers wrote an algorithm that would take DTED, which is standard military terrain data, in this database, and feed it into the autopilot. So the airplane not only knew where it was at in 3D space, right? So it has a terrain map and all that kind of stuff in it, but it also knows the performance of the aircraft. So it knows the energy state. What's the tightest radius turn it can pull? How many G's can it pull? What's the climb rate? What's the descent rate? All those sorts of things, and combines it into this system that will take control away from the pilot should he not avoid an obstacle.
Oh, wow.
And the cool thing is it continuously computes a escape plan. So it's not just one set maneuver to avoid some certain obstacle. If you're flying up a box canyon, it's smart enough to know that maybe it can't climb over the wall, but it will move over to the side to give you enough room to do a 180-degree turn and come back out the other side, all independent of the pilot. So that was done, essentially with a model airplane with an Android phone and some software running on it. And that's been successful enough that it's fielded right now on F-16s, and F-22 and F-35 come right out of the factory with that software loaded. So we know of at least 6 lives that have been saved because of this system.
What if the pilot has an iPhone? What's he do then?
Don't even need a phone anymore. It's just all loaded. But if there's a YouTube video out there of an F-16 guy doing some air combat training at Hill Air Force Base, and he passes out, loses consciousness. And the aircraft is in full military power, so it rolls over nose low, goes supersonic, headed roughly straight down. And the system took over, leveled the wings, pulled up, and then got him back above his hard deck and essentially saved his life. He comes to, has no idea what's going on, and he finally realizes that he had blacked out. Pretty interesting stuff. And I can probably put that link in here too, if you guys want to see it.
Crazy.
Plus, there's a whole myriad of other stuff that we do. Everything from pilot training and currency. We're qualified just like the full-scale pilots are. Obviously not as stringent, but we have to go through the same processes and the same checkouts. They have to have to take a check ride, and you have to get a medical clearance and all that kind of stuff. We do that. We also fly, an S1000 multi-rotor to take aerial photos of the center and different things like that. There's tons of little research projects that go on in between all the rest, where maybe you just want to get a nice picture, or maybe you want to fly a new radar system and see how it works. There's just all kinds of stuff like that.
So do you do much, if any, first-person view flying? Or
we do, particularly with the twin glider setup, because we're dropping this 100+ pound rocket. You tend to not fly within line of sight. Yeah. We're also towing. So if you can just think about the dynamics of an autopilot controlled vehicle, having one autopilot controlled vehicle follow another autopilot controlled vehicle to aero tow is not a trivial task. So what we do is we will automate the tow plane where it flies an autonomous racetrack, and then I'll fly the glider initially within visual line of sight, but eventually I transfer over to an FPV setup. Although I just use a monitor, I don't use goggles. Yeah. And follow the tow plane out to the launch area, and then we'll drop out there.
Wow.
So it's a combination of all of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like, for instance, we were doing some head tracking, not necessarily head tracking, but pan tilt type camera work, a long time ago, before that was really common in the RC world. Sure. We thought that was probably a good way to sort of get better situational awareness. As any FPVer knows, you have a limited field of view, unlike a real airplane where you can turn your head and look around, things like that. So we're trying to improve that. So we did some work with that. The other thing we're working on in the Prandtl series is the Mars project, where we're trying to fly these little planes on Mars. And there's a lot of challenges there. One of the largest being, one, how do you navigate on Mars, right? If you want to drive to another state or cross town or whatever, what do? You punch in your address into GPS. Well, there's no GPS on Mars, right? Exactly. There's not even a reliable magnetic pole. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
What we're looking at is a stereo vision based tracking system where the vehicle will navigate, say, to a common waypoint, a large physical land feature out in the distance, something like that.
Okay.
So that we can
What
navigate.
what about using
ahead.
stars?
Well, yes, sort of, but the whole planet is moving through space just like Earth is, and we don't have an accurate celestial map from Mars' point of view, right? So we think it's just easier to use a couple cell phone style cameras and some simple stereo vision algorithms and navigate that way.
Well,
That's the current theory.
If you want to go that way, as opposed to mapping the stars from Mars, okay.
Yeah. So the other challenge is that there is an atmosphere there. It's not breathable like we have here on Earth, but there is fluid in the atmosphere on Mars. So about 12,000 feet on Earth. I'm sorry, about 12,000 feet on Mars is equal to about 100,000 feet on Earth. So it's like trying to fly a 24-inch span airplane at 100,000 feet. So this might cruise at say 30 knots indicated, which is the amount of across the wings into the pitot tube, but it's closer to 400 miles an hour, so true airspeed. So your velocities are quite high, your indicated airspeeds are very low, and you also have lower gravity, so you have inertia problems, what we call inertia coupling, where it's a phenomenon that happens when the way the mass is distributed across the wing, it doesn't lead to a stable configuration. So in short, we're adding mass, like a third of the way out or halfway out the span to sort of dampen these roll oscillations that we get at these higher altitudes and lower Reynolds numbers. So it's definitely a challenge just to get the thing to fly correctly. And then somebody else is going to take it, probably JPL, and miniaturize everything, all the components, space harden it, do all that kind of stuff. So we're solely concentrating on figuring out the aero portion of it, making the thing a flyable vehicle, and then we're integrating the payload and miniaturizing and figuring out how to pack it up later.
So what kind of software are you running? I mean, what are you, like, fluid dynamic software? What is it? Computational CFD stuff that you're running that you can model the atmosphere on Mars.
So the answer is our own. So it's some stuff that we've developed, right? We have, again, some very smart people that do that. But we can take something like a SolidWorks model and import that into a CFD environment and get an idea. We also use the basic stuff, AVL and X-Plane, things like that, along with the standard math type programs like MATLAB to do all that stuff. And so anybody who's familiar with that sort of environment would be, right at home doing the stuff that we do. We use a lot of the same tools that the regular folks do, but we do have access to some tools that we've developed on our own to do some really high-end type stuff.
Cool.
Somebody's asking about the FPV.
I'm sorry?
Oh, somebody was asking about FPV frequency. We typically run an L band, which is 1,600 megahertz, something like that. We do some 5.8 stuff, which is a typical FPV frequency. The problem with 5.8 though is we have to compete with F-35. We're on an Air Force base, and they do flight tests there. So F-35 flies there regularly, and a lot of their telemetry is on 5.8. So simply from a scheduling perspective, we prefer not to use it because it's crowded.
Yeah, I would imagine that is. Somebody asked earlier, and I was trying to find it, and I don't see it. But what do you think about the job market in the UAS system? In the UAS field right now?
Well, I think it's exploding. There's room right now for operators, people flying multi-rotors, doing power line inspections, pipelines, all that kind of stuff, aerial cinematography, all that kind of thing. But right now, I think that's in its infancy. There's still a lot of R&D type outfits. Somebody trying to develop a product to market. People like Bird's Eye View, and they make the Firefly, and some other folks out there that do different type things where they're trying to build a build a product. I think that market is probably stronger than the operator market at the moment. But eventually, I think that's going to switch. I think there's going to be a huge market for operators and entrepreneurs that want to pony up some cash and build a little business and try to do that. So it's a very exciting time. Unmanned aircraft are absolutely the future. They'll never replace piloted aircraft 100%, but they can certainly do a lot of things that are either too boring or too dangerous for a piloted aircraft to do in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, so let me ask a more important question, which is all about me. So,
Go.
does NASA have a place for me? I have a degree in mechanical engineering. I did that for about 10 years or so, 10, 12 years. Then I have a degree in teaching, physics certified. Could I get a job at NASA?
So I do a lot of public outreach. I visit a lot of schools. I do things like this. I've done a couple videos. And especially when I'm talking to the younger generation, the short answer is yes, absolutely. I'm giving you the longer answer now, though. Is one of the things that I tell folks when I talk to them is I ask them, how many of you have ever thought about working for NASA? And, some hands go up. And then I'll ask them, how many of you think you're smart enough to work at NASA? And fewer hands go up. Then I ask them, I want you to try to think of a job that NASA does not do. Because I think, and you may be under the same impression that you have to be a super smart scientist and a degree in engineer.
But I am.
Awesome. There is absolutely a place for you. I'm unencumbered by a degree. I'm entirely self-taught.
Yeah.
So I'm proof that you don't need to be a doctor or whatever to work at NASA. But the point is, the most important thing you need to work at NASA is the willingness and the want and the drive to do that. So we're constantly looking for people, young and old, who want to do good work. They want to do, research. They want to make a difference. And it's not all engineers. There's every discipline that you could possibly think of happening, within NASA. Not necessarily at my center, but at all the centers. So, take a few minutes, a few seconds, whatever. Even some of the guys in the chat, and try to come up with a job that you think NASA doesn't do. And we'll see if you can stump me. I haven't been stumped yet. So that's a pretty tall challenge. But the real answer is usajobs.gov. Okay. We have tons of mechanical engineers. Engineering.
What about mixing paint? Does NASA mix paint?
Oh, God, Pat.
So I'll let you stew on that one for a minute. But, just think about something like the X-15, right? A hypersonic aircraft. NASA developed an ablative coating that they could paint the aircraft with to withstand the heat. So the answer is yes, absolutely. We have paint shops. We have to paint all our own aircraft. So yeah, that's low-hanging fruit. You got to do better than that.
My fruit hangs low, buddy.
Nice.
Keep it clean, Pat.
So I see a dry cleaning one here. That's a good one. Of course, we have all the flight suits the pilots wear. All the space suits have to be cleaned, all that kind of stuff. Another one's asking about bridge inspection. Sure, we have an entire facilities department. We not only do bridge inspection, but we do all the building and maintenance inspection, all that kind of stuff, which incidentally, we're starting to do a little bit of that with unmanned aircraft, specifically the S-1000, things like that.
Yes, that's what I need, is a job where I can go fly every day, inspecting bridges and buildings and all that. That would be fantastic.
And there's another one, underwater welding. So at NASA Johnson, I think it is, they have this huge underwater tank where they train astronauts to do things. And yeah, they do some underwater welding. They've developed some techniques there to do some of that in conjunction with NOAA.
Okay.
Lumberjack, yeah, that would fall under our facilities guys. Whenever you have to clear out an area to build a building or put in a runway or a tarmac or something like that, yeah, absolutely.
Red, those are off base.
So the point is that NASA employs a huge wide variety of people. So when you ask the question, is there a place for me at NASA? Absolutely, there is a place for nearly everyone. Now, not everyone can get in. It's simply a numbers thing, obviously, right? And you do have to be, whatever your chosen profession is, they don't necessarily take the guy that just got fired. They want somebody that knows what they're doing. So you've got to be good at what you do.
Sure. Well, I'm in ink manufacturing, and that's something that I know they do a lot of, because we actually will supply ink to some of the.
We have a giant graphics department that does all of our decals, all of our posters, all of our artwork, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, graphic artist, that type of stuff. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
We also take interns every year. Ironically, the Prandtl project is largely an intern project. We do the construction, the actual flight of the aircraft, but the interns a lot of times will do a lot of the integration on the airplane. I'll give them a set of guidelines, or we'll have a document that says, you have to interface with this system or whatever. And we'll, of course, oversee it, but we give them a huge amount of latitude to actually touch the airplane and build things.
That's awesome.
And then they'll take the data and reduce it and, do something with it.
My youngest son is currently a freshman majoring in physics right now.
Awesome.
And that would be something I think would love to do.
I can put the intern link up.
Awesome.
Now, as you can imagine, we get thousands and thousands
yes,
of intern applications, and I take interns specifically in my lab. And believe it or not, when I look through the interns, there's other folks that take the applications and they'll sort of filter them out and they'll bring them down to me, and I'll look through a few dozen or something like that. But if I see a kid that's got model airplane experience, top of the pile right off the bat. Cool. Because I know that experience brings with it a broad knowledge, especially if they've been doing it for any length of time, And those DIYers are exactly what we do. We don't build anything production. Everything is, custom one-off. And, if you show me a kid that's been flying RC airplanes for 5 years, I'll show you a kid that knows how to use a ton of different glues. He can use a soldering iron. He knows the basics of aerodynamics. If I tell him to do a weight and balance on an airplane, he at least knows what that is and can, formulate a basic plan to do that. If you're talking about aircraft setup and differential and all these things that are, really pretty advanced in the aero world, an RC guy knows that stuff right off the bat. Right. So I'm pretty partial to that because obviously that's my background and that's where I came from. So I look for that right off the top of my head anytime anybody applies. I'll take a kid that's doing a design build fly challenge, and if he's a pilot, he's right at the top of the pile. If he's a C student, I don't care. I'll take him over an A+ student every time that's never touched an RC airplane.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Delta Dart's got it right. It's Aussie. That's where you get your offer.
Okay.
Well, you better write that down, Pat. You may be able to get a job at NASA.
Well, I can't work at Lowe's forever.
That's right.
By the way, I've never been fired from a job. Just saying.
Cool.
Leaving was always voluntary.
That's right.
Well, not of my own volition, I should say.
Yeah, Keegan, we're going to have to make sure Keegan knows about this because this is something I bet he could, Yeah.
Keegan Sponholz is a real good young guy. He is just wrapping up his first semester at some school in North Dakota for commercial aviation.
Awesome.
And he actually built what was it, 120%?
110 or 101% Cree in 4 days.
Neat. That's a neat airplane.
Yeah.
Just
so if you're not already subscribed to the NASA Armstrong YouTube channel, I would suggest you do that. They tend to post a lot of my stuff. A lot of the what the center does, all this crazy stuff, right? So you get to see it all there first. But if it's unmanned, chances are I've got something to do with it. Everything that's 330 pounds and less and 300 knots and less goes through my lab. So I'm responsible for airworthiness and pilot training, all that kind of stuff, as well as JPL, all JPL's unmanned stuff. at least the pilot qualifications goes through me.
Okay.
You got a lot going on then.
Yeah, pretty busy.
Well, thank you for taking the time to do this. I mean,
Yeah,
wow.
exactly.
No worries. I'm just like you guys. I love this stuff and happy to give back in whatever little way I can.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I appreciate the fact that you was willing to come out here and talk to us for a little bit. And,
Sure.
we've got a couple of younger people that will definitely be interested. I know Aero Geek is like all over it. I guess Keegan probably had some things he had to do. I don't know, because he was in here earlier, but I know he'll come back and listen, and he'll be really interested as well. Especially get to maybe come out and do something like that, because they've built a lot of things, designed some things after other things. Him and his father actually do a lot of stuff together.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, for those folks out on the West Coast, AMA is having their annual convention in Ontario this year. I believe it's in early January.
Yep.
And we always have a pretty large presence there, and we bring out a bunch of airplanes and talk to folks. And I just like to invite whoever might be interested to come on out and say hi. I'll be there the whole weekend, shaking hands and kissing babies and that kind of thing. And if you have a question about the intern program or whatever, that's also a great place to meet the guy who runs that whole program. And a lot of times that introduction is really the key to sticking out in the crowd. We get, as you can imagine, NASA gets a stack of applications, and every one of them is absolutely fantastic, right? They're all at the top of their field. They've all got these recommendations from their instructors. They're all carry a 4.0 plus average. So they're all really, really smart people, and it really comes down to the luck of the draw. So I've picked a few interns that I've met in person over folks that I thought may have been better on paper. And I'm glad I did that, because, the personality and the drive is what's most important to me, for whatever that's worth.
Well, I think that's worth a bunch. I mean, I would rather hire, I've been a manager myself for a while, and I would rather hire someone that may take a little longer, but wants to do a better job than somebody that's great on paper, but really doesn't have any drive.
I always want the person who wants to be there. If you want to be there, I'll teach you the rest.
The enthusiasm is the key.
Yeah,
almost anybody can do anything. It's the will to do the work to make it happen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the want to's got to be there, or you forget it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we've had some that come through that think they're gracing us with their presence, and that they, they're few and far between, but there have been a few, and those folks, they do fine and they get through the internship, but they don't get invited back. And the one thing I always tell the folks that come in for the internship is this is really a 10-week job interview, because if you do well at the internship, we're clamoring to hire people. It's virtually guaranteed. If you do well at the internship and you show interest, you can get a job offer relatively easy, and you're set for life if you want to. So if that's the area you want to pursue, then I highly suggest that you do what all you can to get in there.
Aero Geek, are you listening?
Yeah, he's right. You can't teach enthusiasm. You've got to be, an airplane nut, and it helps, right? There's 1,000 guys, I'm sure, standing in line that would stab me in the back and slit my throat in a heartbeat if they knew they could take over my job. So that's not lost on me. I'm very thankful, very grateful for where I am, and I'm happy to share that. And same for you folks that are out there. If you're ever in the neighborhood, if you can give me enough advance notice, I can probably get you out there to take a look and give you a tour.
Oh, I would love that, Pat. Why don't you, as you head this way?
Dude. Yeah, right.
Well, we'll just head out.
I'll talk to my cousin, okay, and we'll hop on his King Air and pick you up, and we'll be out.
Yeah, sounds good, man. I'm ready.
So Ryan says that Edwards is out in the middle of nowhere. It kind of is, but I live in Palmdale. It's a 45-minute drive from my driveway to my desk, and LA is less than an hour, so it's not that far out of town. It's far enough to be out of the idiot range and close enough to go to the beach or do whatever you like if you want.
See, I would
it's
the idiot range.
What is cool? driving over the mountains out there, like you're going up, 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 and it's like a freaking rainforest when you get up on top of the mountain, and then you come down the backside, and the clouds overhang, and then you just come out into this stark landscape. It is such a drastic change and such a cool experience.
Yes, we live in the Antelope Valley, and it's a V shape, right? And I live in the far western part of the nook of the V, and we call all those mountains, and pardon my French here for a second, but we call that a shit screen because it screens out all the weather. We have 300 plus flyable days a year here.
Oh man,
the clear air. Now the drawback is it's windy. It's windy a lot. In fact, when the Wright brothers were looking for a place to fly, they wrote the National Weather Service and asked for the top 10 windiest places in the country. And Kill Devil Hills, won out. That was the #1 place. But number 4 is Lancaster and Palmdale right here. So it's windy. But if you're into slope soaring, that's awesome.
Yes,
if you're into foamies, that's a little bit more of a challenge. I do have a few foamies, and you have to pick your days, but it's not so bad. If you're into dynamic soaring, the world record was set, an hour from here at Bird Springs Pass. Acton and Parker, which are 2 very well-known dynamic soaring hills. I mean, I can see one of them from my front yard. The other one is maybe 30 minutes away.
What was the world record speed? Do you remember?
I want to say it's in the 500s, low 500s, 515 or something like that.
Do you think they'll ever break supersonic?
Yeah, I do.
Wow.
I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to take a huge leap in logic in the way that the airplanes are designed. Nobody's really looking at area ruling yet. And I tried to have that discussion with one gentleman, and he says, well, that's only for powered planes. So I said, okay, well, good luck. But yeah, the challenge is, going that fast and turning that tightly. Things get small and happens fast. I've only ever dynamic soared to maybe 300, low 300, something like that. 500 is a whole new world. And then, depending on the day, 600 plus, that's really smoking. So the planes are nearing 200 Gs in flight. And I think it'll get there, but it's going to take, the forward thinkers. I remember when 200 miles an hour was a big deal. A guy named Craig Tallman was the first guy to go 200. And everybody thought, oh man, they're never going to go any faster. Now we're, 2.5 times that. So that's pretty incredible.
500 miles an hour, just crazy.
It's amazing. The fastest RC planes in the world are non-powered.
Yeah. Yes,
absolutely. And I love to tell people that, especially the folks that aren't really into RC. We'll chuck the engine first thing. And go from there. I mean, foamies are doing close to 200 miles an hour now, so it's incredible.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Delta's asking me about rotary wing stuff. He asked that a couple times. I apologize. Yeah, we do some rotary wing stuff. Although our center is the Center for Flight Test for NASA, we do mostly fixed wing stuff. We do some rotary wing stuff as well. It just depends on what we're researching. And I do fly helis as well.
Oh, do you?
Oh, cool.
Those things I tried and just can't do it.
It's
I don't have.
Yeah, it's just one of those things I picked up along the way. I'm not a hardcore 3D heli guy, although I can do some stuff. I was more into the precision, believe it or not, pattern style heli, 4-point rolls and things like that. F3C, I think they call it. Anyway, and drag racing, helicopter drag racing. I went sideways on that for a number of years. That was really crazy, lots of fun.
That's one I haven't heard of.
No, I've never heard of that.
It doesn't seem to be too popular anymore. 10 years or so ago, maybe 15 years ago, it was all the rage. Guys are building these crazy overpowered helicopters, a 60 size motor and a 30 size airframe and running insane head speeds and all that kind of stuff. In fact, JR made a dedicated drag race helicopter at one point.
Huh.
Yeah, those things just terrify me. They really do. Everything about them is scary to me.
It's a bunch of parts flying in formation.
Yeah, right. Just waiting to fly off and hit me.
It's spinning blades of death. Those things
exactly
are just scary.
So, chances are that NASA would ever send you or someone out to Flight Fest in Ohio in the summer?
Well, I just went to the one in Northern California earlier this year.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we have a budget for those sorts of things. And what you have to do is, get a hold of our public affairs office and get your request in early. Like, it's probably too late for next year already, although it's not impossible. And it also has to fit in with our flight schedule and all that kind of stuff. But, offline, I can give you all that information. I can give you my work email address, and you shoot me an email, and I can put you in touch with the right sort of folks. And yeah, it happens. I mean, that's part of my job is public outreach. I
will. Please do send me that info, because
Okay.
I will contact them and say, hey,
Well, we can talk to
Flight Fest West is okay, but
all
Flight
this,
Fest Ohio is where to be.
That's the one.
That's
one.
the one. Yeah, that's the original, and it's usually the largest, and
I'd love to come.
Spectacular.
It's right there, and of course, Flight Test's home. So
yeah, good stuff. So
yeah,
unfortunately, I probably couldn't bring anything, to fly. But
I'll bring something for you to fly.
I can bring some I can bring some personal stuff. I just can't bring work stuff.
You show up, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of stuff for you to fly.
Yeah.
I'll have plenty of airplanes there for you to fly, buddy.
Awesome. I think we're going to do Oshkosh this year. There's been some talk of us flying the 25-foot Prandtl wing there. So
nice.
that might happen.
Well, I'm sure that some of the people at Flight Test will be there as well, because they always go, because it's like 2 weeks after Flight Fest.
Yeah.
Normally?
Yeah.
Early August. Keegan will be there working. I'm sure he works there every year.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll have to put them two together for sure. So.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we've been on here about an hour and 50 minutes or so. We don't want to keep you any longer. Red, we sure appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No worries.
I so enjoyed talking.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And reach out on RC groups. My handle's Alien Tech. My YouTube channel, which there's not a whole lot there, but there is some stuff there, including a full-scale Prandtl. We never talked about that. It's just my name there on. And of course, email me if you like or whatever. I'm always happy to talk and help out.
Well, it's more than appreciated. One of the things that we try to do, with our podcast is try to get kids interested in, flight and RC and engineering and any of that, STEM stuff.
Yeah, big deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah,
it is a big deal. And we want, whether it's, young men, young women, everybody, we want everybody to be involved in it, because it's just so much fun.
It's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And people, the people that have not been exposed to it just don't understand how fun it is. And we try to, bring those people, some of the joy that we get. So,
well, as I said before, but NASA is hiring right now. We look for people right now, and there's a huge STEM presence here in the area, as you can understand, because of the, all the aerospace that's here, Lockheed and General Dynamics and Boeing. They're all right here, right?
Yeah.
As long, with NASA. So, we look for kids. We take interns, believe it or not, senior year of high school. So if you're old enough and in between your junior and senior year, you can apply and be an intern while you're still in high school, and all the way through college, and however long the whole program works out. So we're always looking to replace our gray-haired folks. So there's a joke, that all of our workforce is aging, and it's very true. I'm 46, and I'm one of the younger ones there, right? There's a lot of older folks that are simply retiring, and we're not replacing them quick enough. So very eager to do that.
Well, see, I've got about 13 years left. I wonder.
There's no mandatory retirement age for my position, so I suspect I would easily work there into my 60s or 70s if I wanted to.
Yeah, I don't ever plan on retiring, so I might as well find a job that I love.
Well, they always say you find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life, right? I've been lucky to be doing that now for 20 years or so. So I'm pretty happy about that.
That's fantastic.
That's a success right there.
Right.
It really is. So you
Thank
should
you.
Exactly
definitely walk proud with that, because not a lot of us are able to do.
It's fun stuff.
So again, Red, or should I call you Robert or just Red?
Yeah, my mom calls me Robert.
Okay.
Red's fine.
Mom. But Red, we really appreciate it, and I want to say thanks to Pat for reaching out to you. You've brought a lot of really neat and interesting stuff to us, and I will continue to watch your stuff and see what goes on out there at the base. And
yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on. And I feel like we just scratched the surface. We could probably talk all night if you wanted to. So
I'm okay with that.
Well, if you would be so kind to come back at some point, maybe
sure.
we'll do that again.
Yeah, sure. Just let me know and we'll work it out.
Yeah,
I would love to talk to you more. I thank you so much. I have the Prandtl article that was printed out laying around here somewhere because it's always around here somewhere.
Excellent.
I just don't know where it is. Oh, wait, is that it right there? No, that's the Skype pup.
Nope, that's not it. So
for
those of you on Facebook, there's a group called the Horton Flying Wing Believers, and it's a closed group, so you have to ask to join. However, myself and Al Bowers, who's again the chief scientist, the Prandtl's his baby, frequent that quite a bit. So there's a lot of really smart folks in there too that have developed tools to calculate the twists and all that kind of stuff. If you're really interested in that sort of thing, I recommend you join that group and start asking questions. There are a few folks in there that are building models and they're flying them, and it's really a great community of folks that are trying to sort of venture out of the known knowledge base that we have. There's all this stuff that's the accepted way, and we're kind of pushing our little fingers outside of that, trying to make some new stuff. So it's a good thing.
Awesome stuff.
I'm looking right now. Hey, there it is. I just click join group. Done.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, again, we won't keep you any longer. But we sure, really appreciate the fact that you come on, shared some time with us, and shared, knowledge, and hopefully maybe we'll get an intern or two out of it before it's over with for you.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that would be great. And yeah, we'll see what we can do about once this thing's done. Maybe see if we can get you out to Flight Fest East, either 18 or maybe 19 as well. You never know.
Very cool. I'd love to come hang out.
I'd love to meet you there, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to be able to shake your hand. So
yeah, it's overrated.
Yeah. No, man, fine. So if it wouldn't have been for this wonderful little RC group that we have, I wouldn't have near as many friends and near as close of friends as I do. So
yeah, agreed. That's for sure.
That's the best friends I've ever had in my life are because of this.
Yep.
Because of RC.
Yep. Absolutely.
For sure.
So everybody out there listening to us, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, guys.
We really appreciate Red, and we appreciate you guys listening to us. And come back in a couple of weeks, probably after the first of the year. We'll probably have some new stuff for you. Don't forget, call our wonderful voicemail because we didn't get any this week. It's 802-465-FTCC, and that's 802-465-3822. Everybody, thanks for listening. This is the Flight Test Community Cast saying blue skies.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
And